Playing outside, or using notes outside of the scale, is a common technique used by jazz and jazz fusion players, but is something that rock players could easily benefit from. So if you're unsure of how to do that, stick around, because in this video, and that song you just heard, we're going to use it to illustrate exactly how to do that. So let's check it out. The solo you just heard demonstrated several ways to use outside playing and several methods to get there. The underlying chord progression in this went from an A7 to a D. And this is important to note because one of the approaches that I take for outside playing is involving the chord tones themselves. So I'll give you an example. The very first lick you heard comes from outlining the A7 arpeggio. So as an example, the A7 arpeggio, according to this first lick, is going to be A, C sharp, and E. That's 7 on the 4th, 6 on the 3rd, 5th on the 2nd string, and the 8th fret on the 2nd string is the G. I even go as far as to play another A up here and another C sharp on the 9th fret 1st string. So in total, that's basically the A7 that I'm picturing and that I'm creating the line around. So you'll notice that the second note of that arpeggio is C sharp. So the first approach number one, is to come at a chord tone from a half step below. And that's exactly what I did here. I went from C natural to C sharp. So C natural being outside of the key, or outside of the chord and the scale involved, this gives you that exact feeling of being outside and then inside. So you hear tension and release. So if I continue on, everything else is basically within the key at this point, except for that first note. But then I'm going to literally repeat that exact idea right here. C natural to C sharp. And right away you can hear the push and pull of being outside versus inside. And really that's the key. To do this tastefully, you have to kind of know how much tension you want to use and pull back to something in the key. I finished this phrase off pretty much staying in the key again and adhering to the chord. I'm using F sharp to get to G as a bend, and that again is the flat 7 of our chord. Right after that note though, the chord changes to a D. I don't play much over this D chord. It's literally 3 notes. But I'm literally using the exact same concept. I'm playing I'm playing A over the D chord, which is the 5th note of the D chord. So that's a chord tone. Then A flat, and then right back to A. So the first phrase takes care of the A7 and the D first round. Next round, we're back to A, and I'm going to use a similar approach here, but just in different ways. So basically what I do here is I start with a very country-ish sounding bend here. I've got the 12th fret, 2nd string, I'm going to bend it. While it's being held, I'm going to grab the 12th fret on the 1st string with my pinky, bring the bend back down, land on the 10th fret A. Then I'm going to bend the 12th fret on the 1st string, which is E up to F sharp. Now all of this is within key, there's nothing outside yet. But right now I'm going to use that same approach as before, and I'm going to slide E flat to E, so again over A. E is a chord tone, so I'm coming from below the chord tone into it. I'm going to do the same for C into C sharp, and then I'm going to grab E again on the 4th string. Now the method of playing this fingers-wise is a little bit of a pretzel, but what I'm doing is I'm using index to do this one, third finger to do that one, so that I can just play this note with my middle finger and everything should come out clean. Like so. Okay, next up is the D chord, and in this case I'm sort of outlining a D arpeggio again, using much of the same concepts as before, where we use approach notes into chord tones, but I'm also using chromatic passing tones, and I'll show you exactly where that happens. Here's the lick. So I'm starting on an F natural, which over the D chord, F sharp is the third. So F sharp is the chord tone. I'm coming from below it a half step, grabbing A, which is a chord tone, descending. So I'm on the third string. I'm doing 10, 11, 14, and back down. And again, two of the three notes are chord tones, the F sharp and the A. So this is the one that's coming into the chord tone. Down to the root note D. But what I'm going to do here is use some chromatic passing to get to the 7th of D, or the flat 7 of D, which insinuates a D7 chord. But that's one way you can get an outside sound, is by taking two scale notes and filling in the gap. So if you look at a normal scale, for example, you'll notice that you don't hit every fret. You're gonna skip certain frets. Well, filling in those frets can give you that impression of an outside kind of sound. So that's probably that's one that takes the least amount of knowledge or thought. You're literally just filling in the blanks by doing that. And if you do it here and there, it sounds really cool, like here. And then just to put a stamp on D, I do a double bend from C to D. And if I'm lucky, I get a pinch harmonica out of it. Okay, on to the next phrase. Leading back to an A, or the A7 chord, I'm going to take that, again, my favorite approach is to come from below, half step below a chord tone into the chord tone. So over A, I'm going C sharp. I'm going into C sharp via C, and then hitting E. So the C sharp and E are chord tones. Now here's a neat tactic. This is another one I've heard a lot of jazz and fusion players, both guitar and saxophone players, do this sort of trick a lot, where they take a motif, they take a basic scale idea, or sometimes it's an arpeggio-based idea, and you literally just run it down chromatically, one fret at a time, for a certain distance. So in this case, the idea sort of outlines an A7, generally speaking. I've got the G and the E there and the C sharp. These are all chord tones, but the B is not. The B is a scale tone. But there's my motif. And what I'm doing is I'm playing those four notes chromatically, one fret at a time. So you're going to go from notes that are in the key to notes that aren't, then are, and then aren't. So you're really kind of riding right through the spectrum of notes here. Simple concept. It doesn't seem to have a lot of pre-planning involved in it, but the concept, when you hear it over a chord, actually sounds really neat if you use it in moderation. So I managed to do that much of it. And here's the interesting thing though, rhythmically, I know this has nothing to do with inside and outside, but just as an interest, it's four notes, but I'm playing 6 notes per beat. So it'll give it an interesting rhythmic contour as well, which is super cool. That just kind of adds to the effect. Then when we get to the D chord following that, we end up with this. Now that, I'm again I'm insinuating a D7. The reason why I'm saying insinuating in this case is because the chord underneath isn't a D7. It's actually just a regular D chord. But if I imply D7, that means that I'm adding a C natural to it, which is the flat 7 of D. So the chord doesn't have to have it. I can imply it in my line, and that's what's going on here when I do this hammer and pull concept between B and C, B and A. So that's 7, 8, 7, 5 on the first string. Then I'm going to bounce G on this string back to the A. And then once again, below a chord tone, right into a chord tone, F sharp. So all of this is really just dancing around the note I'm trying to get to. Right there. So that makes the impact a little more impactful, I guess you could say. And then to round it off, for the most part, I'm outlining a D7 again. D, sliding into F sharp, A. I hit B, which isn't a chord tone. I hit D, which is a chord tone, but then I come to the 7, which is C. And that's why the very end of that phrase has a little more tension to it. So there you go. Cool. And then, after the D, we end up with one more A7 chord. And what I'm going to do here is demonstrate yet another approach you can take. Because A7 is a dominant chord, you can get away with applying certain scales over it. Instead of just choosing certain notes that fall into chord tones, you can actually find scales that accentuate the notes of the chord. So one of my favorites is the half whole diminished. And what that is literally what it sounds like. From A, you take a half step, then a whole, then a half, then a whole, then a half, then a whole, then a half. And then to get back to your root, a whole. In total, it covers a lot of really cool ground, and this is something I'm going to cover in more depth in another video. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use that scale to get me the outside sound for A7. And what I do here is I play up the scale, essentially going across strings 4 to 1. So I'm doing fourth string, I'm going to do 7, 8, 10, which is the 1, the flat 2, and the flat 3. And then I'm going to do third string, 6, 8, 9, which is the major third, the flat 5, or the augmented fourth, depending on how you want to look at it, and the fifth itself. Going back to the second string, 7, 8, and 10, we're going to get the sixth, the flat 7, and the root. So far we've got. And then we're going to the first string, and we're going to do 6, 8, 9, and that's going to give us the flat 2, the flat 3 again, and the regular 3 again. Now, astute listeners and guitar nerds might have noticed that some of the notes I mentioned, the root, the third, the fifth, and the flat 7, are the notes of an A7 chord. They are the notes of the chord we're playing over. That's why you can get away with this rather strange sounding scale over this chord, because the notes of the chord are in it. And honestly, it really is as simple as that. To get the kinds of sounds that appeal to you, that are maybe outside, the real key is to make sure that the notes of the chord are found in the scale more often than not. That's why this scale and the rest of the lick, there I use a little bit more chromatic passing. That's why all of this works really, really well over the A7 chord. Now I use that chromatic passing at the end because the next note and the next chord are both D. Kind of planned ahead, I will say that. I did target that purposely. Because I really want to land that note right on the chord. Now, since we're on the D chord, I'm going to end the whole thing like this. You know, cheeky little phrase there, but what I'm doing is, once again, scale tone from below. So I'm going to come at F sharp via F, and then I'm going to skip a string. And I'm going right to the flat 7 of D, which is C. So over a D chord, you get the dominant 7 sound with literally just a couple notes. So that's the last phrase. Tabs for this lesson are found in the description below, both PDF and Guitar Pro. And if you like these sort of solo breakdowns, check out this video right here, and I've got more coming up, so you might want to subscribe.